But Piers, you would think that with weeks or months to prepare for this, that due diligence would have been done to ensure that this school, which had a website, an active website, which was clearly separated from the base, is not dissimilar to schools at other IRGC bases along the coast, would have been flagged.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Grab a seat, because this one is heavy and you're going to want to hear it out. Today we're breaking down a Piers Morgan Uncensored panel that turns into a real showdown over one of the most disputed strikes of the recent Iran conflict. On one side, you've got two New York Times investigators, Malachy, Browne, and Christiaan Triebert, laying out hard footage and evidence about what hit a school full of students. On the other side, former Air Force pilot Ryan Bodenheimer pushes back hard, while writer Scott Horton tears into the whole justification for the war. The question hanging over all of it, was this a tragic mistake or something nobody wants to admit to? Stick around all the way through, because the strongest moment doesn't land until the pieces start fitting together. And you'll see exactly why when we get there. Before we jump in, drop a comment and let me know what city or country you're watching from. I love seeing how far this community reaches. All right, let's get into it.
Okay, Malachy Browne, welcome to Uncensored. What do we know for a fact about this, do you think?
What we know for a fact is that, yes, multiple buildings in that area were targeted, and yes, the school building is adjacent to the IRGC facility. According to experts that I've since spoken to since our early reports, it's not uncommon for these IRGC bases, much like American bases, to have schools for the children of the serving members of the IRGC. This particular school was opened up to the public a few years ago, cordoned off from the site, public entrances opened. Other parts of the site also repurposed for public use as a medical clinic and a cultural center there as well. And witnesses, or not witnesses, but sources that we've spoken to say that, yeah, there weren't weapons stored there, that it was more of a logistics hub than, you know, a base that was used to store cruise missiles. Why would you store explosives right beside the school that your kids are going to? We know it was hit in that early salvo on the first day of the war, the start of the working week when school was in session. Teachers had called parents to collect their kids once the war started, but by the time that most parents got there, the school building had been hit, yeah, devastating consequences. There was a second wave of attacks a couple of hours later on that same area and facility. There have been some reports, we haven't been able to confirm them, that the school was hit twice, including the Sky News report with an eyewitness who has survived the attack. But that's what we know so far. And then on the casualties, yeah, the original casualties were put at 175. The Iranian state has since revised that down to about 156. And Christiaan here, my colleague, and others have been able to corroborate that number.
Right, well, let's bring Christiaan in here. Welcome to you to Uncensored. Obviously, there's a lot of investigation that's been going on into this, and I guess, look, in terms of who fired it, there's one of three potential options, I guess: the Americans, the Israelis, or was it some rogue missile that Iran had acquired which they misfired, which seems the least likely of the three scenarios. But do we know for a fact that it was a US Tomahawk missile?
Yes, we do. I mean, Malachy, and I think, you know, others on the panel already referenced it as well. But like, indeed, you're mentioning the three actors here. But the fact that we actually have footage of a projectile coming in at that same compound makes it unmistakable that this is a U.S. attack, because what we're seeing in that video is a U.S. Tomahawk missile. And Trump went as far as to saying, like, Iran may have Tomahawk missiles, but there's evidence to back that up. So I don't think it's really worth going into that claim right now. I think by now he has also said, like, he's willing to live with the with the fact if it happens to be the U.S., right? That's what he said in response to questions of the media about this. Yeah, coming back to the casualties, like, yeah, we were able to establish 156 at least 156 people have died, 120 of them being students at the school, 73 boys, 47 girls, teaching staff as well. I think also 7 parents that we were able to identify that already got into the school, as Malachy was referring to, school driver, and so on. So absolutely devastating attack.
This is the part that reframes the entire story, so stay with the details. Malachy lays out something very specific: a building with a public-facing website, a school operating on an ordinary working morning, and staff making calls the moment the incident began. Those facts establish what kind of facility this was before anyone debates what it became. Here's the distinction that does the heavy lifting. Malachy describes it as more of a logistics hub, not a site stocked with cruise missiles. Then he raises the question that the whole clean target story has to survive. Why would you store explosives right beside the school your own kids attend? It's a reasonable person test. No conventional military doctrine parks live munitions next to a civilian education site, so the convenient version starts to strain the second you look at the layout. Then Christiaan adds the evidentiary layer. He says the footage points to a US attack, citing visible video of the projectile on approach. And when the alternative surfaced, the suggestion that Iran may have fired it, his response was measured. There's no evidence for that at all. That's not a rhetorical flourish. That's a sourcing standard, and it's the standard the official line can't meet. And the figure that anchors the segment, Christiaan notes 120 of those present were students. That single number changes how every claim afterward has to be weighed. When a strike lands on a documented civilian site, the analytical question stops being "was this unfortunate?" and becomes "was the targeting process actually defensible?" That's the thread we follow for the rest of this.
But what is also very interesting is that it's only one of several attacks that opening day of the war where the US actually hit civilian sites.
But it's very reminiscent to me about the debate that was going on in Gaza, where the constant refrain from the IDF, for example, was when a number of civilians had been killed, was always they were targeting a Hamas compound, a Hamas school or hospital or whatever it was, where Hamas were based, using it as a base. They were using civilians as some kind of shield and so on. Are we in the same kind of realm here, where the argument may be, and they say they're going to conclude the investigation soon, it's ridiculous it's taken 80 days. But if they come back and simply say, look, we were targeting the base and this missile strayed into the neighboring school here, it was a genuine mistake. Is that a plausible scenario here? Is that what we're really looking at, do you think?
I think that what we're looking at is outdated targeting is the most likely scenario. We can't preempt what the investigation is going to finally show. By the way, it's 3 months on, and in any previous incident, they've come out much sooner than that and admitted liability. So what it looks like, and according to sources that we've spoken to and written about, it looks like it was outdated targeting information that was used and dusted off. And we don't know if that's because of the speed at which targets were being chosen and prepared, or what, because there was, this was in the midst of, a flurry of targets on targeting military sites and government officials in the opening hours.
Here's where the pattern becomes the story. Christiaan points out we've heard the structure before. A strike hits a civilian site, and the standard explanation is that the building was secretly an enemy stronghold. He ties it directly to the same framing used in another recent conflict, where the stated target got described as a militant compound. Same template, different war. Once you recognize the formula, it's hard to keep treating each instance as isolated. Then there's the timeline, and Piers names it cleanly. It's taken 80 days. Malachy adds the comparison that gives that number weight. In previous incidents, liability was acknowledged far sooner. So the analytical question is just what explains the delay? When an account is straightforward, it doesn't usually take 3 months to assemble. The proposed explanation deserves the same scrutiny. Malachy says the cause appears to be outdated targeting information that was essentially reused without rechecking. An old file pulled forward applied to an active civilian building. And this is where a little history is useful. In 1999, during the Kosovo conflict, US munitions struck the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, and the official explanation was outdated maps and an old database. Different decade, identical rationale. That doesn't settle this case on its own, but it does mean stale data is an explanation with a track record. And a track record is exactly the kind of thing that warrants independent verification rather than acceptance on trust.
But Piers, you would think that with weeks or months to prepare for this, that due diligence would have been done to ensure that this school, which had a website, an active website, which was clearly separated from the base, is not dissimilar to schools at other IRGC bases along the coast, would have been flagged and, had proper work been done, put on perhaps a no-strike list, which is an obligation of militaries to maintain. So there's no evidence that this compound or indeed the school was used for military purposes, was storing weapons or anything like that. It just looks like it was lazy targeting with devastating consequences.
So before I go to Ryan, just to conclude on this part of it, if it is how you believe it to be, would that constitute potentially a war crime or not?
It's the obligation of militaries to mitigate civilian harm. If there are repeated reckless patterns, then under international humanitarian law, it could be constituted a war crime. As Chris said, these aren't the only civilians or children that were killed in the opening hours of that war by the US using weapons that we can identify as only US weapons. But it depends on whether this is a repeated pattern of recklessness.
And this is the section that sets the standard the operation has to be measured against. Malachy frames it precisely. With weeks, even months to prepare, basic due diligence should have flagged the site. An active, live website clearly separated from any base, the kind of location-competent targeting keeps on a protected list specifically so it isn't hit. All of it was sitting in plain view beforehand. So his conclusion is grounded, not dramatic. Malachy says there's no evidence the school was used for military purposes. No weapons, nothing. And his phrase for it is the one worth keeping: lazy targeting with devastating consequences. Not fog of war, not an impossible split-second call, a failure of basic verification. Here's the principle underneath all of it. When a military selects a target, the burden sits with them to establish it was legitimate, not with the affected community to prove otherwise after the fact. That's the entire function of the rules. So when Malachy says a repeated pattern of recklessness could meet the threshold for a violation under international humanitarian law, he isn't being theatrical. He's reading the established standard back to the people responsible for applying it. That's why a slow investigation and a brief statement shouldn't be the end of it. The community involved is owed a verified account, and the party responsible doesn't get to author the version where the process looked reasonable. The evidence is documented, the explanation is thin, and accountability here isn't an attack on anyone who follows the rules. It's the mechanism that protects the next school. So what do you make of this? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.